He was born into ruin, into the ashes of a family crushed beneath the boots of betrayal and blood. The year was 1159, and Japan was split by a civil war so brutal it devoured not just armies, but identities, loyalties, entire generations. His name would one day echo through the mountains, etched into the walls of temples, and the breath of ghost stories whispered beneath cherry trees. But at birth, he was nothing more than an afterthought. Minamoto no Yoshitsune, the orphan boy who should have died. His father, a proud Minamoto warlord, was hunted down and executed by the rival Taira clan, whose rise to power painted the Heian court in crimson. The Taira wanted a clean victory, and that meant erasing every trace of the Minamoto bloodline. His older half-brother Yoritomo was exiled to the wilderness. Yoshitsune spared, but only because they thought they'd already broken him. They sent him to a monastery, stripped him of his name, and demanded he become a monk. But you can't cage fate. And you can't erase what's written in the bones of a warrior. Inside the monastery walls, wild chants echoed and incense clouds curled like smoke from forgotten battlefields. Yoshitsune was planning his resurrection. Legends claim he was trained not by men but by the mythical Tengu demonic spirits of the forest with twisted faces and long noses who recognized the fire inside him. Whether true or not, the meaning is clear. Even the supernatural couldn't ignore this boy. They say he practiced swordplay in secret, mastered the art of strategy before he could even grow facial hair. While the Taira basked in their stolen empire, Yoshitsune was sharpening destiny. By age 15, he vanished from the monastery like a ghost. Not afraid, not running, but preparing. He fled north, where a family alike gave him sanctuary. For years, he disappeared from history. But every blade he lifted, every movement he perfected, was a rehearsal for war, and that war arrived in 1180 like a curse called back from the past. The Taira had grown bloated with pride, corrupt with comfort. Minamoto no Yoritomo, his long-exiled half-brother, answered with fire. From Kamakura, he raised the flag of rebellion. And across the cold northern winds, Yoshitsune heard the call. He left his hiding place and rode to meet a brother he'd never known, a man more politician than samurai. Yoritomo didn't see family. He saw a tool, a weapon, and Yoshitsune was about to prove sharper than anyone could imagine. The war that followed, the Genpei War, was a storm of broken loyalties and burned temples. The Taira had the court, the gold, the ships. But Yoshitsune had something older, something colder. His first test wasn't even against the Taira. Yoritomo, paranoid and ruthless, saw a rival in their own cousin and ordered Yoshitsune to eliminate him. He did so with surgical cruelty, annihilating the cousin's forces in a surprise attack so fast and decisive, it seemed almost inhuman. The message was clear. Yoshitsune wasn't a brother. He was an executioner. Then came the battles that turned him into a legend. At Ichi-no-Tani, the Taira had fortified themselves in a coastal fortress thought impenetrable, protected by cliffs, forests, and the sea. But Yoshitsune didn't see obstacles. He saw opportunity. Using a narrow mountain path considered suicidal, he led a cavalry charge down a near vertical slope, smashing through enemy lines like a phantom of death. No one saw it coming. It was as if the mountains themselves had betrayed the Taira. The fortress fell. Panic spread, but it was only the beginning. At Yashima, he took it further. The Taira fled to the sea, assuming safety in their ships. But Yoshitsune lit fires on shore, tricking them into believing Yoritomo's entire army had arrived. In the chaos, the Taira disbanded their positions, and Yoshitsune struck again, devastating them in a surprise night assault. His tactics weren't just brilliant, they were terrifying. His genius wasn't loud, it was surgical, and it was unstoppable. Then came Dan Noura, the final act, a sea battle where gods were said to have watched from the waves. Yoshitsune coordinated attacks from land and sea, forcing the Taira into a panic they couldn't recover from. Mothers drowned with their children to avoid capture. Imperial treasures sank into the black depths. The Taira were annihilated. The war was over. Yoshitsune had won it all for Yoritomo. But that's where the story turns from glory to nightmare. Because in history, no victory comes without a price, and for Yoshitsune, that price was everything. Yoritomo, cold and calculating, didn't see the victory. He saw a threat. Yoshitsune was loved by the people, adored by the court, immortalized in song. His fame eclipsed his brother's, and in the twisted logic of power, admiration becomes danger. Instead of honoring Yoshitsune, Yoritomo branded him a traitor. He stripped him of command, declared him an enemy of the state, and sent assassins to end the very man who handed him an empire. Yoshitsune was forced to flee like a criminal. From warrior to fugitive, he roamed the wilderness with only a few loyal followers. He was betrayed by allies, hunted by his own blood, haunted by the very victories that should have made him a hero. He took refuge in the north once more, sheltered by the same family, who had once protected him, but Yoritomo's wrath was relentless. Eventually, the walls closed in 1189. Cornered and outnumbered, Yoshitsune made a final, impossible choice. Refusing to let his wife and young child be taken, he ended their lives himself, then committed ritual suicide. They say he died kneeling, calm, a final act of defiance in a world that had twisted loyalty into a death sentence. But even that wasn't the end. His body was never found. Legends say he escaped, that he became a wandering monk, that he fled to China and lived on as a nameless swordsman. Some believe he was the inspiration for Genghis Khan. Others say he became a spirit of vengeance, riding storms through mountain passes. But here's the truth: Yoshitsune was never just a man. He was a mirror, a reflection of what happens when brilliance meets betrayal, when loyalty is devoured by power. His life wasn't a tale of war. It was a tragedy written in blood and silence, a warning that even the brightest flame can become the most dangerous threat in the shadows of jealous kings. They called him a traitor, but history knew better. Minamoto no Yoshitsune was not just a casualty of power, he was the embodiment of a cruel truth, that loyalty means nothing to the empire once your light begins to outshine the throne. After his so-called betrayal, his image was slandered, his victories buried beneath politics and fear. But you can't erase a legend, not one carved into the skin of a nation, and while his enemies celebrated, the people whispered his name like a prayer. Because deep down, they knew Yoshitsune hadn't been defeated by the sword. He'd been devoured by his own blood. What followed was more than death, it was erasure. Yoritomo, now the unchallenged ruler of Japan, went further than murder. He wanted silence. He wanted Yoshitsune to vanish from the records, to become a ghost in the shadows of his dynasty. But the human soul is stubborn, and Yoshitsune's spirit, whether real or metaphor, refused to die. In poems, he became a tragic hero. In paintings, he was depicted with serene defiance. Plays turned him into a demigod. Children acted out his battles. His life had crossed a threshold. It was no longer just history. It was myth. But the true horror lies not in his death, but in what came after. Because Yoshitsune's story became a cycle, a pattern. Again and again, Japanese history repeated this same betrayal. The brilliant warrior used by politicians, elevated in crisis, then discarded in peace. In the centuries that followed, generals and swordsmen who grew too loved, too powerful, too independent, were destroyed, and each time, the people remembered Yoshitsune. His name became a curse against tyrants, a quiet rebellion written in folklore. Yoritomo, now shogun, ruled from Kamakura. His power unmatched, his enemies scattered. But behind the walls of his fortress, he was consumed. Paranoia replaced peace. Every shadow looked like Yoshitsune. Every whisper sounded like a blade unsheathed. He passed law after law, trying to cement his legacy, to make the world forget who had bled for his throne. But it was too late. Yoshitsune was more than a brother now. He was an echo. One that wouldn't fade, and fate, as always, is not without irony. Yoritomo's own sons would later turn on each other in brutal power struggles. The dynasty he founded rotted from the inside. One by one, his descendants were assassinated, poisoned, or exiled. Born in treachery, died the same way. When it finally fell, centuries later, monks said they could hear the sound of hooves in the mountains at night. A lone rider, swift as lightning, with eyes like burning coal. They say it was Yoshitsune. Still watching, still writing, still waiting. But history didn't stop with Yoshitsune. The idea of the betrayed hero has haunted every corner of the world. Julius Caesar, murdered by friends beneath marble columns. Joan of Arc, burned by the very king she crowned. Boudica, left alone in rebellion. The pattern is ancient. It whispers that greatness often walks alone. That loyalty, true loyalty, is not rewarded by kings, but punished by them. And in Japan, no one understood that like Yoshitsune. Centuries after his death, His grave in the northern mountains became a place of pilgrimage, not for warriors but for the broken, for those who had been loyal and crushed, for those used and discarded. They left offerings, poems, swords, tears, because Yoshitsune wasn't just a hero. He was a reminder that betrayal leaves deeper scars than war, that silence can be louder than victory, and that sometimes the most dangerous thing a man can be is unforgettable. But there's a final twist, one that history rarely tells. Some scholars believe that Yoshitsune's exile was self-imposed, that he knew his brother would betray him and walked into it willingly. Not because he was naive, but because he believed in something higher than power. He believed in honor, in duty, in the unspoken code that once separated samurai from warlords. That belief cost him everything. And yet, maybe that's what made him immortal, because in the end, Yoshitsune's body died but his ghost still rides. In literature, in art, in the broken hearts of the forgotten, and in the warning that echoes through time, beware the kings who smile when they need you, and draw their blades once you've given them peace.